The studio lights softened, but Barron Trump's face remained tense, illuminated by a pale blue glow from the giant LED screens behind him. The host had expected a predictable, polished interview, the kind Barron had given before. Calm, reserved, safe. But tonight, something in him was different. The host leaned forward. Barron, your father's recent comments about expanding executive authority have sparked major backlash. Do you agree with him? A familiar question, one Barron had been prepped for, but he didn't give the rehearsed answer. He inhaled sharply, then looked straight into the camera. No, he said. A stunned silence swallowed the room. The host blinked twice. The studio producer behind the glass froze mid-gesture. I don't agree, Barron repeated, firmer this time. And I'm not going to pretend I do just because I'm expected to. The host stuttered. So, you're publicly breaking with your father on this? Live? Barron's jaw tightened. He's my father. I respect him. But I'm 19 now. I have my own thoughts, my own values. And if we're talking about giving the presidency more unchecked power, no, I can't stand behind that. Gasps erupted from the audience. The host scrambled. Barron, this is unprecedented. Have you talked to your father about this? Barron's throat bobbed as he swallowed. I tried. A flicker of pain crossed his face. Real, raw, unfiltered. He told me it wasn't my place. Another deep breath. But it is my place. Because I'm the one being dragged into politics every day, whether I want to be or not. The crowd murmured. Cameras zoomed in. Social media feeds lit up in the background with flashing headlines. The host leaned in, sensing history. What are you saying right now, Barron? Barron steadied himself, fingers gripping the armrest. I'm saying the truth matters more than loyalty, even to family. Another shockwave rippled. And if that means disagree with my father publicly, then that's what I have to do. The host glanced at his producer, who was mouthing the words. Keep going. Barron, do you think your father's policy is dangerous? Barron looked at the floor for a moment, gathering the courage that had clearly been building for weeks. Then he lifted his head. I think giving any president that much power is dangerous, no matter who they are. The audience fell dead silent. And if Dad is watching this right now, his voice shook, but not from fear, from resolve. I'm not trying to attack you. I'm trying to do what you taught me when I was a kid. Don't ever be afraid to speak the truth, even when people don't want to hear it. He exhaled, trembling slightly. I'm holding you to your own advice. The host whispered, My God! Barron unclipped his mic. I'm done letting other people speak for me. He stood. The entire room watched, breathless. This lie that I agree with everything, he says, this idea that I'm just an extension of him, it has to end. And with that, Barron Trump walked off the set. The cameras kept rolling. The world kept watching. And nothing in the political landscape would look the same again. Cut to commercial, apologize, or simply let the silence hang like a monument to what had just happened. But before he could speak, the control room fed a breaking cheering across the bottom of the screen. The moment Barron stepped off stage, the studio dissolved into frantic movement. Producers barked orders into their headsets. Stage managers rushed toward a hallway he'd disappeared into, and camera operators instinctively zoomed in on the empty chair he left behind, as if it symbolized a political earthquake that had just hit. The host sat frozen, unable to decide whether to cut the commercial or let the silence hang over the stunned audience. Before he could speak, the control room flashed a breaking headline across the screen. Barron Trump publicly breaks with his father over executive power. Meanwhile, Barron was already halfway down the corridor, walking fast, not out of panic, but because adrenaline was roaring through him. A producer chased after him, trying to handle phone, insisting his team was asking for him. Barron didn't even slow down. I don't have a team anymore, he said sharply. His own phone buzzed nonstop in his pocket. Calls, messages, alerts. His family names lighting up the screen one after another. His father, his mother, Eric, Ivanka. Unknown numbers from every major network. Barron shoved the phone away and pushed through the back exit. Outside, the cool night air hit him like a shock, grounded him for the first time since he'd spoken the words he wasn't supposed to say. He stood in the alley behind the studio, drawing deep breaths. But even out here, there was no real escape. Within minutes, the clip of his on-air rejection of his father's policy was everywhere, replaying endlessly across social media and news networks. Television studios scrambled into emergency coverage. Commentators spoke with breathless urgency, calling his statement unprecedented, a constitutional flashpoint, or a generational rupture. Everyone had a take. No one had the full story. Far away at Mar-a-Lago, chaos spread to the corridors as advisors scrambled to understand what had just happened. Phones rang on every desk. Rapid response plans were drafted, discarded, rewritten. In a quiet office at the end of a long hallway, Donald Trump sat alone watching the replay. He didn't shout. He didn't lash out. He just watched, eyes fixed on the screen as his son said, with unmistakable conviction, that truth mattered more than loyalty. After a long silence, Trump said softly, almost to himself, "Why didn't he call me first?" Back behind the studio building, Barron heard the crunch of tires approaching. A black SUV rolled to a stop, unfamiliar yet unmistakably deliberate. The rear door opened, and Melania Trump stepped out with controlled elegance she always carried. Her expression was calm, unreadable, but her presence was enough to freeze Barron in place. She walked toward him as if the chaos of the world didn't exist. "The world is talking about you," she said gently. Barron nodded, his heart still racing. Melania studied him for a long moment, not with anger, but with something quieter, something that suggested she understood more than she showed. Finally, she spoke again. "Come, your father wants to speak to you." Barron hesitated before getting into the SUV, feeling the weight of the moment settle onto his shoulders. Melania watched him quietly, her face serene in the dim streetlight, offering no judgment, only expectation. When he finally climbed into the back seat beside her, the door shut with a soft, final click that felt heavier than the sound itself. The ride began in silence. The city lights streaked across the windows as they drove, each flash a reminder of the millions of people watching, analyzing, arguing about what he'd done just minutes earlier. Barron stared at his reflection in the glass, wondering if he'd crossed a line he couldn't return from. Melania eventually broke the silence. "You spoke from your heart," she said, her voice calm. "But your father—" He was not prepared. Barron pressed his palms together, his thoughts scattered. "I wasn't trying to hurt him," he said quietly. "I just can't pretend to support something I don't believe in." Melania nodded, as if she had expected that answer. "Being true to yourself is important," she replied, "but so is understanding the consequences." Her tone wasn't scolding, just realistic. She knew better than anyone how political storms formed, grew, and swallowed people whole. When they reached Mar-a-Lago, the atmosphere was tense, almost electric. Security moved briskly. Staff whispered in tight clusters, and every face carried the awareness that the center of the political universe had abruptly shifted. Melania walked ahead, her heels clicking steadily against the marble floor as Barron followed with measured steps. They reached the door to his father's private office. She paused, touched his arm lightly, and said, "He is your father first. Remember that." Then she opened the door and ushered him inside. Donald Trump stood by the window, partially silhouetted against the soft glow of the garden lights outside. He didn't turn around at first. He just stared out at the darkness, as if waiting for the right words to materialize before him. Barron stood there silently for several seconds, the air thick with everything unsaid. Finally, Trump spoke. "You surprised a lot of people tonight," he said, his tone firm but not raised. "Including me." Barron swallowed, unsure if an apology was expected or if it would make things worse. "I wasn't trying to embarrass you," he said. "I just didn't want to lie." Trump slowly turned to face him. His expression wasn't angry. It was complicated, a mix of hurt pride, confusion, and a father's lingering concern. "You think I want you to lie?" he asked. "I wanted you to stand with me." "That's different." Barron looked down. "But what if I don't agree?" Trump let out a slow breath and walked toward his desk. "Then you talk to me," he said firmly. "Not the entire country. Not live on air." The words weren't a scolding. It was more of a lament, a father trying to understand a son who was no longer a child. For a moment, the tension cracked just enough for vulnerability to seep in. Barron stepped forward. "I tried to tell you," he said softly, "but you were surrounded by advisors. Always busy. Everyone talks for you. And they wanted me to talk for you, too." Trump's eyes flickered with something. Perhaps realization, perhaps regret. "Those people don't speak for my family," he said. "Not ever." The room fell quiet. The political implications swirled invisibly between them. But underneath it all, this was still father and son trying to bridge a widening divide. After a long pause, Trump finally said, "We will figure this out, but we do it together, not against each other." Barron nodded slowly, unsure if that was a promise or a warning. Before they could say more, a staffer knocked anxiously at the door. "Sir," he said breathlessly, "the networks are calling. They want your response. The story is everywhere." Trump didn't look away from his son. Trump's words, "Let them wait," hung in the room after the staffer closed the door, leaving only the faint hum of the air conditioning and the heavier breath of two people caught between political pressure and family strain. Barron sat down slowly across from his father's desk, feeling the fatigue in his bones now that the adrenaline of the live show had finally begun to burn off. Trump, still standing, pressed both palms flat against the polished surface of the desk and leaned forward slightly, as if he were contemplating not a campaign crisis, but something far more personal. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the muffled storm of voices from the hallway, advisors arguing, strategists demanding direction, phones ringing nonstop. Finally, Trump straightened up and walked over to the small table where he kept a stack of briefing folders. He picked one up, set it down, then another. He wasn't reading them. He was buying time, choosing his approach. "You know," he said at last, "every president faces criticism, some of it brutal, some of it unfair. But this, coming from you, people will use in ways you can't imagine." Barron tensed, already familiar with the media's power to twist anything, especially when it involved his family. "I didn't do it for them," he replied quietly. "I did it because I couldn't live with saying something I don't believe. Not on national TV. Not about something this important." Trump looked at him then, really looked, not as a campaign figure or a public name, but as his son. The frustration in his face softened, replaced by an expression Barron rarely saw from him, a mixture of concern and introspection. "You have your own voice," Trump said. "I know that. I always did. And it's good you care about the country. But tonight, the timing, the surprise, it puts us both in a tough position." Barron nodded, understanding even if he still believed he'd been right. "I know," he whispered, "but if I had warned you that your advisors would have shut me down before I could say anything." That struck a chord. Trump's jaw tightened, not at Barron, but at the invisible crowd of political operatives that had inserted themselves into every corner of his life for years. "They forget sometimes that I make my own decisions," he said. "And they forget that my family isn't theirs to manage." He glanced toward the door, where he could hear faint arguments breaking out. "They're already fighting about what I should say. Half of them think I need to condemn what you said. The other half wanting to spin it as some kind of planned discussion." He shook his head. "They don't get that this isn't strategy. This is us." Barron exhaled, relieved to hear that acknowledgement. The chaos outside seemed to grow louder, the storm intensifying as more networks picked up the story. Melania stepped quietly into the room, closing the door behind her to mute the noise. She stood near the window, surveying both of them with a calm, measured look. "This will not go away by morning," she said, her tone level but firm. "Whatever you decide to say publicly, it must be clear, and it must be united." Trump nodded slowly. "I know." He sat down at his desk, pulled out a blank sheet of paper, and began to write, not a speech, not yet, but notes, thoughts, options. As he wrote, he spoke aloud, half to himself. "If I defend what you said, they'll claim the campaign is fractured. If I criticize it, they'll say we're divided as a family." He tapped the pen, thinking. Then he looked up at Barron. "So maybe the truth is the only thing that works here." Barron frowned slightly. "Which truth?" Trump leaned back in his chair. That families disagree, that it's normal, that you're your own person, and that we handle it privately without letting the media turn it into a circus. Melania stepped closer, her presence steadying the room. You should both say that, she said. Not just him, not just you. Together. Trump considered this, then nodded. A joint statement, he murmured. Not political. Personal. For the first time that night, Barron felt a small sense of relief. I can do that, he said. I want to. Trump set down his pen and closed the folder in front of him. Good, he said. Then we'll face the cameras tomorrow. Together. Outside the office, the advisor continued to argue, unaware that the real strategy had already been decided. Not in a war room, but in a quiet conversation behind a closed door. Morning arrived with a kind of brightness that felt almost mocking, as if the sun hadn't gotten a message that the political world was in turmoil. At Mar-a-Lago, the halls buzzed with a level of agitation usually reserved for election nights. Staff moved quickly, advisors whispered urgently, and reporters gathered at the gates in numbers that grew by the minute. Inside, behind another set of closed doors, Barron sat with his mother at a small breakfast table, untouched plates in front of them. His phone vibrated every few seconds. Friends, journalists, classmates, strangers. Everyone wanted a comment, a reaction, a confession. He kept it face down. Melania sipped her tea quietly, studying the way she always did when she was deciding whether to offer advice or let him find his own footing. Eventually, she set her cup down. Today will be difficult, she said softly. Not because of what you said, but because everyone will try to make it into something it is not. Barron nodded. His stomach nodded with a blend of nerves and determination. I don't regret what I said, he murmured. I just wish it didn't hurt him. Melania reached over and placed her hand gently on his. You spoke with honesty. That is not wrong. You and your father will handle this. The world will follow. Meanwhile, in a different wing of the estate, Trump sat with 3 senior advisors who were trying and failing to steer him toward a more forceful response. One advisor insisted that Barron's words had created an exploitable vulnerability, while another argued that acknowledging disagreement would make Trump appear stronger and more relatable. Trump listened with a stoic expression, but it was clear he wasn't absorbing most of it. He finally stood, ending the meeting with a curt wave. Enough, he said. This is a family matter, not a campaign one. His advisors exchanged glances, some relieved, others frustrated. Campaign professionals hated when human emotion interfered with messaging. Trump walked down the hall toward the room where the joint statement was being finalized. The draft had gone through several revisions overnight, some too defensive, some too polished, some too political. In the end, the version Melania insisted on felt the truest, direct, measured, without theatrics. Trump read it again as he entered the room where Barron was waiting. The young man looked tired but resolute. Trump handed him the page. You still agree with this? He asked. Barron read aloud the first sentence quietly. Families can disagree on important issues, but respect remains at the center. He nodded. Yes, I do. The final press event was scheduled for noon. As the hour approached, reporters flooded the outdoor plaza near the palm-lined walkway. Cameras positioned strategically, microphones perched like eager beaks. The media speculation had reached a fever pitch. Every outlet had theories. A family fracture, a calculated campaign pivot, a generational clash, a brewing political realignment. No one knew for sure. That uncertainty only fueled the frenzy. When Trump and Barron finally emerged, Melania walking just behind them, the crowd's roar surged instantly. Flashes erupted. Questions were hurled. But the trio moved together with deliberate calm. Trump approached the podium first and adjusted the microphone. His gaze scanned the crowd, then briefly shifted to his son. There's been a lot said in the last 24 hours, he began. Some of it true, some of it not. What happened last night wasn't scripted, wasn't planned, and wasn't political strategy. He paused, letting the words settle. My son expressed his own opinion, something I've always encouraged my children to do. And yes, we disagree on this issue. That's normal. Families disagree. He stepped back and gestured for Barron to join him. Barron approached the microphone slowly. The cameras focused sharply on him. The world watched with unblinking attention. He cleared his throat. "I spoke honestly about my concerns," he said, his voice steady. "Not against my father, but for myself. And we talked about it, privately as a family." A gentle breeze rustled the palm leaves behind him. "We might disagree on certain things, but that doesn't change that we are family, that we respect each other, and that conversations like this should happen openly, not behind pressure or expectations." Melania stepped forward next, her presence quiet but commanding. She didn't speak long, just a few measured words about unity, respect, and family strength. But her tone carried a calm finality that signaled the matter was closed. The three of them stood side by side, a united front not of political choreography, but of personal reconciliation. When they stepped away from the podium, the questions erupted again. But this time, they didn't return. Instead, they walked together back toward the estate, leaving the media to interpret the moment while the family reclaimed a small measure of peace behind the closed doors that had witnessed so many storms before. The joint statement dominated every news cycle within minutes. As Trump, Melania, and Barron retreated inside, reporters dissected every detail: the tone, the body language, the subtext. Some praised the show of unity. Others argued it revealed deeper fractures beneath the surface. Online, reactions exploded across every platform. Some users applauded Barron's honesty and independence, calling it a rare moment of political authenticity. Others criticized him for speaking out publicly in the first place, insisting he should have kept disagreements private. Memes, debates, think pieces, and hot takes spread like wildfire. Barron watched none of it. He sat alone in the quiet of his room for a while, the curtains drawn to shut out the late afternoon glare. His phone buzzed nonstop on the nightstand, messages from classmates at college, distant relatives, strangers claiming solidarity or outrage. He didn't know what to do with any of it, so he ignored it. What unsettled him most wasn't the attention. It was a realization that nothing he said would ever stay small again. Every word he spoke, even in good faith, could swell into a tidal wave the moment it hit the public sphere. The world had always treated him as part of a larger story he never chose. Now he felt that truth more sharply than ever. Across the estate, Trump sat with his closest advisors in the formal sitting room. The polished dark wood, the heavy drapes, and the elegant gold accents made the space feel more like a throne room than an office. The advisors spoke rapidly, offering strategies to capitalize on the moment, but Trump raised a hand to silence them. He wasn't interested in theatrics today. Instead, he asked a rare question, one that surprised even himself. How do we move forward without making this worse? The advisors exchanged glances, uncertain how to navigate a situation that wasn't purely political, but deeply personal. After a long pause, one finally said, "Let the moment breathe. Don't escalate. Don't frame it. Let the country see normalcy." In Washington, however, the ripple effects were immediate. Lawmakers seized on the drama to support their own arguments about executive power. Some cited Barron's comments as validation for their warnings about overreach. Others dismissed them as youthful naivety. Late-night hosts weighed in, analysts speculated on family dynamics, and political operatives quietly adjusted their strategies. For the first time in months, conversations about executive authority had shifted from abstract debate to something visceral, grounded in the very human conflict between father and son. Senatorial aides exchanged messages. "Did you see what Barron said?" It became impossible to talk about the issue without referencing that moment. Back in his private wing, Barron finally stepped outside onto a quiet balcony overlooking the gardens. The evening air was warm, with a faint breeze moving through the palm trees. For the first time all day, he allowed himself to breathe deeply. He didn't regret speaking out, but he felt the cost of it. The pressure, the scrutiny, the uninvited spotlight that came with every word he uttered. He wondered if honesty was always worth the fallout, or if some truths were meant to be spoken differently, at a different time, in a different way. He wasn't sure, but he knew he couldn't go back to being silent. Melania joined him a few minutes later, stepping out quietly and standing beside him without speaking. She looked out over the gardens, her expression serene but thoughtful. "You handled yourself well today," she said eventually. Barron exhaled softly. I don't know if I did. She shook her head. Strength is not perfection. Strength is choosing your own voice. She let the silence linger before adding, now you must learn how to carry it. Inside, Trump sat alone in his study, staring at the muted news coverage on the television. Every channel was replaying clips of the joint statement, analysts debating what it meant. But Trump wasn't listening to them. Instead, he was thinking about his son, how quickly he had grown into someone who challenged him, who believed in something enough to risk backlash, someone he hadn't fully understood in a long time. For the first time in years, Trump wondered if he had underestimated the impact of the world they lived on the boy who had somehow become a man. As night settled over the state, the House finally grew quieter, though the outside world remained loud. The political storm would continue in the morning. There was no escaping that. But for the moment, a fragile calm settled among the three of them. They had faced the public together. Now they would have to face the consequences privately. The house was nearly silent by the time Barron walked downstairs later that night. Most of the staff had gone home, and the hallways felt unusually still, as if the building itself were catching its breath after the chaos of the day. He paused outside the door to the study, the glow of warm lamplight slipping through the narrow crack. He could hear the faint murmur of the TV, turned down low. For a moment he considered walking away, avoiding the conversation he knew he needed to have. But then he took a steadying breath and stepped inside. Trump looked up immediately. He wasn't at his desk, but in one of the leather armchairs, elbows resting on the armrests, fingers interlocked. The television replayed their joint statement for what felt like the 100th time, but Trump muted it as soon as he saw Barron enter. Neither spoke at first. Barron sat across from him, feeling the weight of the moment in the quiet room. The tension wasn't hostile, just heavy, thick with things unsaid. Trump finally broke the silence. You caught me off guard today. His tone wasn't accusatory, just tired. Barron nodded slowly. I know. For a few seconds, Trump said nothing, and Barron waited, unsure what would come next. Then Trump leaned back, exhaling. You're not a kid anymore. I need to stop talking to you like one. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was the closest Trump had come to one in a long time. Barron looked down at his hands, absorbing the words. I didn't mean to embarrass you, he said. I just felt like something wasn't being addressed, and people were twisting everything. I wanted the truth out there. Trump nodded, his jaw tightening slightly. I get that. I don't like how you did it, but I get it. For the first time since the TV incident, Barron felt the tension ease just a little. Trump wasn't angry, at least not in the way Barron had feared. He looked more troubled than furious, more reflective than reactive. The world is watching you now more than ever, Trump continued. Every word you say, people will use it for or against you, or against me. The last part slipped out with a hint of vulnerability, something Trump rarely allowed anyone to hear. Barron met his father's gaze. I don't want to be used, he said quietly. By anyone. Trump nodded again. Then you'll have to learn fast.
Jasmine Crockett unveiled the truth about Melania Trump. Her defense crumbled in seconds.